Hello. I'm going to give everybody just a couple minutes to try to see if we can get a few more to join us. How's everybody doing this semester?
Making it.
I understand. We're almost to spring break, so
Yeah. How's your year going?
it's going pretty well.
Good.
How has the online class been going in here? Have you been able to understand kind of what you're supposed to be doing?
I think so. So far it's going okay.
You've had the advantage of having me in Comp One, so my line of thoughts may be easier for you to understand than some of the others. It's one reason I wanted to get on today and just make sure everyone's aware of kind of how to work Moodle for this class and to make sure they're staying on top of everything. Also, I wanted to discuss our book. Have you read it?
I have.
Did you like it?
It was hard to get into at first, and then once I got into it, it was not bad.
Yeah, the language, being that she writes in the way that we hear the words in the South, I always tell students try to read it as if you're listening to your grandma eating cornbread and buttermilk, because
Th-
it's kind of how she writes is the way that we hear a lot of times, but it's hard to read it that way because we're so used to reading words spelled correctly. So
I actually had to look at it that way because I have family that still kind of talks that way.
absolutely.
My dad in particular has a lot of the same wording that they do in the book. So I had to really at first think about it, and then once I got it down, I was okay. But
Right.
it took a little bit to get into it.
Yeah. And that's common with any kind of literature where they write in a way that you hear the word and not exactly the way it's spelled. Once you kind of get into the routine of it and to the rhythm, it's easier. But at the very beginning, it is very difficult to kind of get in
Mm.
because it's almost like reading a different language. You're trying to constantly decipher what everything means.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started, guys. Everyone, if you can hear me, or actually, if you're having trouble hearing me, send me a message so that I know and we can get that resolved. Otherwise, I'm just gonna kind of go ahead, and if we have other people join us, I'll just admit them to the Zoom meeting as we go along. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, I have some notes here. I wanted to go over the syllabus just a little bit to make sure everyone's aware of how the points work in this class. So we have 100% of the points. Out of that 100%, 70% is going to come from what is called your final research project. Now, the 70% is actually broken down into specific parts of the paper that we're going to have you turn in. And I say we because every Comp 2 class works the same way in terms of the assignment being one large assignment that holds most of the weight of the grades. And over the course of the semester, we show you how to get ready for those bigger papers that you may have in your upper level classes. Okay. So for the other 30%, that is coming from your discussion board post, which is 10% of your grades. And that will add, the whole class is set up on a 500 point scale. So those discussion board posts are worth 5 points each, and you will have 10 of them. To get the full 5 points, you must both write a post and reply to a peer's post. If you've only been writing a post, you're only getting part of the points. Also, if you're not meeting the word requirements, you may only be getting part of the points. So if you've been making lower than what you thought you would, or maybe than what you thought you should, go back and make sure that you're actually meeting the requirements of the word length, and also that you are posting and replying, because that will keep you from getting the full 5 points. And we only have 10 of those discussion board posts, and we've already done 7 of them. Okay. So we only have 3 more discussion board posts. We'll have one this week. That'll be the 8th. And then we'll have 2 more throughout the process of the writing portion. Now, the other 10% is coming from your reading quizzes, which there are 5 total reading quizzes. We've already had 4. We're going to have 1 more over chapters 19 and 20. And then that'll be it for the quizzes. We'll be completely done for the quizzes. Those are 10 points each. So you have 5 of them. That adds up to 50 points. Again, this is 10% of your grade. The reading quizzes are open book, open note, and they're not timed, and you can retake them as many times as you need to. So the point is not for you to lose points here. It's really for you to be able to gain points and also gain knowledge by looking up the answers if you don't already know them. Same with the discussion board post. If you haven't posted, you can go back and post. You can still get those points. So I'm really hoping that I see some more, well, not some more, because I've had a pretty regular turnout from those of you who keep turning your stuff in. It's certain people that aren't turning their stuff in that I hope they don't think they can't go back and do those discussion board posts and the quizzes, because they can. Now, the last 10% of that 30% that's not part of the big writing grade is the pre-writing and revision. So the point of this is that I want us to practice those steps in the writing process that hopefully you all learned in Comp 1. And some of those steps include brainstorming, outlining, and peer review. So to make sure that you're doing those steps, because I think they're absolutely critical to getting a good, well-rounded essay, I have actually turned it into part of the points for the class. So again, this will add up to 50 points. And you should have a total of, let me see how many of those you're going to have. You should have a total of, let's see, 5, I believe. You'll have your brainstorming, your outline, which are already up for you to turn those in. Now, the brainstorming, all I need you to do is write on a scrap sheet of paper, if you need it to be, your brainstorming ideas about your essay, okay? So if you go underneath essays, you can see that I'm already asking for the abstract for your final essay. And what I'm asking for underneath the brainstorming is you just coming up with some ideas about what your paper is going to be about. And I would focus mostly on the themes that you see happening in Their Eyes Were Watching God, and why you think those themes are most important to the author. Why is she trying to teach us about these themes? So that's what I'm looking for in brainstorming. With brainstorming, you can write, you can do free write, you can do webbing, you can do stasis questions where you ask yourself who, what, where, when, how, and why. You can also do listing. There's really no rules for brainstorming. I just need to see that you're actually writing down some ideas for your paper. Once you get those ideas written down, take a picture of them. You can do that on your phone and then just upload it as a file underneath the brainstorming link or assignment for pre-writing and revision. For the second one, the outline, you're going to need to go underneath your worksheets tab and print or download the basic outline sheet, fill that out for the outline assignment underneath pre-writing and revision. Now, each time that you turn these in, these are going to be worth 10 points, because after this, we are going to actually do 3 peer review forms. The first one will be over that 1,000 words when we have that due. The second one will be over the 2,000 words, and the third one will be over the 2,500 words. And you may be asking yourself, what is she talking about? 1,000, 2,000, 2,500? So that all comes into the 70% of your grade. Remember, I said that 70% of your overall grade is going to be made up of what we call the final research project. But that 70% is going to be broken down, okay? So 10% of that 70%, which basically adds up to 35 points, is going to be this abstract that I have underneath your essays, okay? For an abstract, we are simply looking for a paragraph that briefly summarizes what your paper is going to be about. Okay. Now you need to have already filled out your brainstorming and your outline to really get a good abstract, because you got to kind of already understand what your paper is going to be about before you can write that paragraph. But I do expect it to be an APA 7th edition formatting, and I do expect it to be a document that you're just simply going to keep adding to. Okay, so there should be a title page and an abstract in that first submission for your abstract for final essay. And then your third thing that you turn, or I'm sorry, the second thing that you turn in for that final research project is going to be your annotated bibliography. So your annotated bibliography is going to be comprised of 10 outside sources. By outside source, what I mean is sources that are other than Their Eyes Were Watching God. So on the annotated bibliography, what you're going to do is you're going to write out a reference list, except for at the top where you put references, you're going to put annotated bibliography. And then once you have all your references down, remember to get those alphabetized, hanging indent. This should also be APA formatting, 7th edition. You're going to write 3 to 4 sentences immediately following each reference that tells me a little bit about that reference. In other words, let's say you're using an article from an academic journal that you found through the databases online with our library. You need to read through that enough. I'm not saying you have to read it cover to cover, especially if you know that it's not something you're going to actually be using in your final essay. But let's say it's something you thought it might be good for your essay, and you didn't find out you weren't going to use it until you got to reading it. You want to make sure you read the abstract, read through all the major parts, maybe the first paragraph, the last paragraph, and the first sentence of every paragraph in between. Get a good idea for what that author's saying in that paper, and then summarize what that paper's about in 3 to 4 sentences, and put those 3 to 4 sentences immediately following that reference. And that's all an annotated bibliography is. Now, I will upload some documents underneath worksheets that will help you with the annotated bibliography. But that's just kind of an overview of what that assignment's going to be. And that's worth 10% of the 70%. So that's also 35 points. Now, the third thing you're going to turn in, that's worth 10% of the 70%, another 35 points, is that first rough draft of your essay, which I'm only asking that it be 1,000 words, okay? So 1,000 words is maybe 4 pages, around about. And that's worth 35 points. Then we're bumping it up to 70 points on the second rough draft. This is where you have 2,000 words. Now, this is not 1,000 words plus another 2,000 words. You're going to use your initial 1,000 words, and then you're going to add another 1,000 words to it. Okay, so another 4 pages or so. And then your final draft, which is what we're calling the overall project, is going to be worth 50%. And that is worth 175 points. Okay. So what I mean by the final project is I'm going to need the title page, the abstract, all 2,500 words, and your annotated bibliography at the end for this to be a complete final research project. And that is what will be worth the 175, is all of that put together. But as you can see, we're breaking it up into smaller chunks so that it's more easily digestible. And hopefully we're teaching you guys that this is the right way to go about these big, larger writing projects. You don't want to wait to the last minute or try to do it overnight or even in a week. You really need to have months to do these bigger projects, these papers that are 8 pages and more. You need to have at least a month. You need to have a good amount of time to kind of space everything out. So that's the whole point of Comp 2, is really just to take everything you learned in Comp 1 and turn it into a bigger, much longer project that we learn how to, deal with the time constraints. Are there any questions about the points and how you get your points in this class and really what the purpose of it is? Now, I do want to point out, you notice I'm not teaching you APA 7th edition. I'm not teaching you how to cite things correctly. I'm not teaching you how to, construct an essay or what a thesis is, because all of that should have, if you've gotten into this class, you should know that from Comp 1. If you don't, I want you to go back to where you have book access on this Moodle page, and you should have access to what I'm using in my Comp 1 class currently. It's not what I used last semester. We just implemented it this semester. So this is the book that all Comp 1 and Comp 2 classes are using in terms of knowing how to structure your essay. If you want to go back and look at that, it's underneath book access, right above Their Eyes Were Watching God, and it's called Composing Ourselves in Our World. And let's say you're like, well, I don't know what goes in an introduction. That will tell you what goes in an introduction. If you don't know how, what a topic sentence is or any of that, that's where you find that information out. That's where all the Comp 1 information that maybe you forgot since the last time you took Comp 1, or being honest, maybe you never learned it to begin with. But this is not the class where I will teach you how to write an essay. This is the class where I teach you how to write the longer essays with the knowledge that you already have about how to write an essay in general. So now I will open it up to you guys. Are there any questions about kind of how the class is being ran and the points that are available and kind of in what order to do things?
I don't necessarily have a question about the points, but do we have due dates for these that we can kind of
So
regulate our time on these papers?
on the essay, if you click on the essay tab underneath Moodle, for instance, the abstract for final essay, I do not have a due date on there. But what I am doing is underneath the writing assignments tab, or I'm sorry, the reading assignments tab, I've been putting your reading and, every week what that was due. This week, I will have week 7, brainstorming and outline due. Week 8, abstract due. Week 9, annotated bibliography due. Week 10, you see what I'm saying? So keep looking under the reading assignments tab. And what I actually, to make it clearer for you guys, since we're done with reading, I will create a new tab that says writing assignments. And underneath there, that will have all of your due dates. The reason I don't put due dates on the actual assignments are because if I do that, then the assignment closes itself out. And if someone needs to turn something in a little bit late, they don't have that option and I have to go in and redo the settings. So it's just easier for me not to put a due date on that section and put it in a different section so that people can kind of, you might have an emergency, you might have had a bad week, or you just need a little bit extra time. I'm trying not to penalize people for being a little bit late, because remember, the goal is not those small assignments. The goal is the big, large assignment and really just breaking it off into chunks, right? So I try not to give real hard line due dates for that reason, because really the only due date is the final project being completely done by the time our final's over. Do we have any other questions?
I was just wondering because I'm not, well, I was born and raised here, but I went to school in Oklahoma, and so Moodle is a little different. And so like I use Canvas, and so like it gives us like announcements and like stuff like that. So like I'm trying, because I didn't, My first semester I only took one class, which was Comp 1, and so I'm kind of just trying to navigate through Moodle. And so, like, your class course is a little complicated to get used to because I have to click like different tabs to. So, like, could you do like a easier way, or like, like saying like, I mean, I did look in like the reading assignment tabs and stuff like that, but like, if I wasn't to check that, I mean, I wouldn't know what's going on in the class.
Right. Really, you just have to go in and look at your reading assignments, and soon like I said, I'm going to create a writing assignments tab now that we're done with the reading. But as far as your discussion posts, your quizzes, those have pretty much been weekly. And if you go to your reading assignments, a lot of those will click the links over to your discussion post. So like week 1, if you click week 1, it'll take you to week 1 discussion post. At week 2, week 3, so on. Now the discussion posts are about to be over because we only have 10 of those, and we've already got 7 done, and we're going to have another one this week over the reading. But as far as the quizzes, we've got one more quiz and then it's going to be done. The rest of our points are going to come from pre-writing and revision and essays for the rest of the semester. So you just really need, and like I said, there's no hard line due dates. So you're just going to need to pay attention to the writing assignments tab on when those things are supposed to be done. And I'm not going to say due because it's not technically due. It's just, if you're wanting to stay on track and get your completed research project done on time, this is the time manner in which I would do it. So for instance, today I will create that writing assignments tab, and I'm immediately going to put in there that you have your brainstorming and outline due underneath the pre-writing and revision tab. That'll be linked to it so that you can click on it and go straight to the assignment. However, keep in mind that if you're not done with that this week, let's say it takes you until next week to do that, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to get 0 points. It's about learning to structure your time in a way that you can complete these bigger projects. As far as the way the Moodle course is set up, each instructor, does it in the way that they think is most beneficial for their classes. Some people do weeks or modules. I don't do that because, again, this is not a class where you're going to have hardline due dates. You don't have modules. We have one big project. So I've broken it down into the different sections that I think that are most important to you. So all of our discussion board posts are in one area. All of our quizzes are in another area. All of our reading assignments or writing assignments will be in, an area. So I really don't know how to group those together in terms of weeks or modules, because for some of you, you may breeze through this and get your stuff done super early and be done with the class even early. Some of you may be pushing it till the very last minute. So that's kind of why the outline of my Moodle is the way that it is. I too came from Canvas, where I taught before I taught here at CARC. We used Canvas, and CARC is actually going to Canvas starting this summer. So hopefully that will clear a lot of things up for you, Alayla.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I also have a question. For the 10 that we need to do, when is that like due, or like is it better to start like now looking for it?
And what is it that you're asking about? The very first part of your question I didn't hear.
The
annotated bibliography.
Yeah.
So the annotated bibliography won't be technically something that I would turn in for a couple weeks. First, you need to gather all that research, which means that you're going to need to go onto the library's website and use their databases to find academic journals and articles that will help you talk about Their Eyes Were Watching God. So like you would go on there and use EBSCOhost maybe and look for anything related to Their Eyes Were Watching God and whatever theme it is you've decided you want to talk about in your paper. Let's say you want to talk about colorism, right? So you might put Their Eyes Were Watching God and colorism and see how many articles pop up. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands. Okay, so there's lots of research. Lots of people have been studying this book since it came out, honestly. And it immediately made its way into the American Lit Canon, meaning that it's taught all over as part of American literature. And so because of that, there's lots of scholarship on it. Lots of people have written about this book. So I don't think you're going to have trouble finding enough articles in terms of like getting 10. It's really about trying to find the articles that are most related to whatever theme that you're wanting to talk about in your paper. And also reading through those articles or skimming them so that you have an idea of what to put on your annotated bibliography. None of this is hard. It's just time consuming. So finding 10 articles, not hard, but it's probably going to take you a few days to do that if you were doing nothing but that. So my suggestion is, I think I've been writing in the messages that I've been sending to you guys. Make sure that you're looking up research on this. Make sure you're finding articles. That's because I knew this annotated bibliography was coming up. So, and I think I've also written that in the messages that you have an annotated bibliography coming up that you're going to need 10 sources for. So start looking for those. So the first thing I would do in terms of the annotated bibliography is I would start finding research, start finding sources. If you're confused about, is this a good source? Should I use this on my annotated bibliography? Email it to me and I'll email you right back and say, hey, that's good, or no, I would keep looking. But you have to have 10 and you're not going to use all 10 in your essay. I'm going to only require that you use 4 in your essay. So you're going to whittle those 10 down to the 4 that you'll actually use. But an annotated bibliography, you're always going to have more than what you need, because anytime you're writing any kind of academic research paper, you're going to want to start out with extra more than what you need in terms of research, and then kind of whittle it down to what is going to best suit your paper. But as far as a due date, there's not going to be a hard line due date. I would try to have my annotated bibliography completed in a couple of weeks. Once you get done with the annotated bibliography and doing all that research, you're going to be surprised at how much more deeply you understand this text and the ideas that it kind of provokes in your mind. And you'll actually probably end up going in and updating your outline and kind of figuring out things that you want to add or take away or replace in terms of what you planned on writing about in your paper. And that's when we will actually get started on our first rough draft, which will be the 1,000 words. But it's, again, it's not painful. It's just time consuming. If anything, English will teach you patience, because these bigger papers, you can't rush them. Not and do well. You can rush them, but you probably won't do very well. It's all about having patience and teaching yourself to work a little bit every day. So I wouldn't suggest like trying to do all your work in this class and for the whole week in one day, because you'll be busy all day and exhausted and so sick and tired of talking about literature that you'll just be cross-eyed. So my suggestion is try to do an hour a day toward this class. And if you can do an hour a day toward this class, I think you'll be in pretty good shape. Are there any other questions about how the class is going, or in terms of how to get your points or understanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Jasmine, go ahead.
I have a question. So at the end of the story, okay, at the end of the story, not the end of the story, but at the end, the research paper, are we just kind of like explaining what happened in the paper, or?
So no, you're not, absolutely not doing a summary. In the research paper, which I will actually post the requirements for the research paper today, because that I'm realizing is probably a little confusing to you guys. So make sure you go in and look at that later so that you get all the details. But basically what I'm wanting you to do is I'm wanting you to think of a theme, which we're only going to have a few minutes left on the Zoom meeting because I only have 40 minutes because I don't pay for Zoom. But I wanted to talk a little bit about themes and ideas that we saw in Their Eyes Were Watching God to give you guys some ideas to kind of start your brainstorming process. But remember, a theme is the main idea that the author's talking about. And there can be multiple themes, which there usually are multiple themes in a work of literature like this. So you want to examine the themes that speak mostly to you, that you feel like you could add the most conversation to this conversation that's already being had about Their Eyes Were Watching God. And kind of hone in on that theme and try to really get to the root of why Zora Neale Hurston thinks it's so important to use that theme in this story. Like, what is she trying to teach the world by using that theme in the story? Because she could have talked about anything in her story, but she decided to talk about that theme, right? And so you want to start thinking about themes and why they're so important in this story. And speaking on that, I do want to mention a few themes that I kind of had written out that I wanted to talk about. So some of the themes that I was thinking about is like, think in terms of like romantic relationships and what these mean to Janie in terms of like power, and how the men treat her, the different relationships she has, how they treat her so differently, but also how they all treat her the same, right? And then also think about feminism, right? We see a lot of feminism happening in the story, even though it seems like a lot of sexism happening, because that's happening too. We also see some women rising up against what we would consider the norms for that setting, right? And Janie's one of those women. She kind of goes against what people think that she should do or act like. Think about racism. We see a lot of racism happening in this story. And what does it mean? What is the author trying to say about that? And something that some people don't really think about as different, but it is very different, is the colorism we see happening. Think about Miss Turner in this situation, right? Think about how she treated Janie because she was so light, and how she treated Tea Cake because he was so dark, right? So we see a lot of colorism. Colorism is different than racism because racism is based on someone's bloodline and the race that they have. And colorism is based on the color of their skin, right? Which can be completely, totally different things. Think about the familial cycles we see happening. Think about like what happened with Nanny and what happened with Nanny's daughter, Janie's mother, and then what happened with Janie in terms of men wanting to possess them, right? And the rape and and think about how that creates family cycles. Think about how violently, I say violent because she literally slapped Janie, how violently Nanny reacted to seeing Janie kiss a guy for the first time. And it's because they've had such an unhealthy familial cycle when dealing with men, right? So think about that, or think about also the independence, the theme of independence that we keep seeing. And I could go on and on. There are lots of themes: security in terms of like money or men or friends or family, loyalty. We see that down in the book. So there's
Judgment as well.
Yes,
A lot of judgment.
Yes. So all of these themes work together to create this story, and it's a fantastic story. But you need to focus in on one. Which one do you think kind of speaks to you the most, or that you think you could have the most to say about? And then I want you to go in and start really thinking about, remember that worksheet on writing about literature that quiz 1 was over? Go back to that, look at those literary devices that are talked about, like symbols, irony, characters, setting, similes and metaphors. So I want you to try to, when you're doing your outline, think about each topic as being a different literary device. And you're using that literary device to try to prove your thesis about the theme. So let's say my theme is about the familial cycles, right? I would go through and I would have one topic paragraph, one body paragraph be about symbols that represent the familial cycle throughout the book. Then I might have another paragraph that's about the irony that's in my book that relates back to the familial cycles. Then I might have a paragraph dedicated to just the similes, because she has so many similes. Everything's like this or as that, right? So I would think back to what are the similes that, like when she said, one thing that would be a metaphor would be when Nanny said that Black women were the mules of the world, right? That goes back to that familial cycle. What's being taught, what's being passed down. You're supposed to take the load. You're supposed to take the burden, right? So that's a metaphor that can directly relate back to that familial cycle. And so these are things that you want to look at in terms of like structuring your essay. How are you going to structure it? That's one way you could do it. You could structure it in terms of, okay, every body paragraph, I'm going to talk about a different literary device. And I'm going to find examples throughout the book to kind of talk about that in here. And it's all going to be related back to my theme and my thesis. So it's going to be proving my thesis the whole time. Does that make sense? A little bit. Remember that I do have office hours. I am here in my office every Monday and Wednesday from 10 to 11 and from 1 to 3, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 3. So you can always call my office phone or you can email me. Honestly, you can email me anytime and I will try to email you back as quickly as possible. But you can also stop by the office or request to do a Zoom meeting one-on-one like we're doing now. If you just want to discuss themes or you want to discuss your theme or you want to discuss the characters. Remember, characters are a literary device. And honestly, you could have a few paragraphs over different characters. You could have a whole paragraph over Janie and how she relates back to your theme, a whole paragraph over Nanny and how she relates back to your theme, and a whole paragraph over Phoebe and the other women in Eatonville and how they relate back to your theme, right? If you were talking about familial cycles. So there's lots of different ways that you can approach this. It's really about what's going to work for you in terms of how do you want to structure your essay. But right now, this is one reason why we set the class up the way we do, is we want you to bite off small chunks at a time. Right now, you're probably thinking, oh, there's so much to do, but keep in mind, you have like a little over 3 months to do this, right? Well, about 2 months now, right? But you have quite a ways to go. So we're wanting you to focus on the small chunks that you can take right now. And one thing that we want you to take right now is I want you to start thinking about brainstorming which theme you think is going to be most easily talked about for you. Some of you may be pulling towards that feminism theme, right? Because you're all about female empowerment and you've got lots of stories to tell and you've got experience and you want to talk about that. But then some of you may be being pulled towards, you know, the power dynamics and the relationships, because maybe some of you have experience with that, or you have family who had experience with that. So you have more background knowledge. You know what I'm saying? It's whatever you, everything in this paper of yours should relate back to your knowledge and what you can add to the conversation of Their Eyes Were Watching God. So you want to pick a theme that's easiest for you to talk about. Does that make sense? Does that help clear things up, Jasmine? Yeah. So right now, don't worry about how am I going to write this essay, because we're not there yet. Right now, we're just brainstorming and we're thinking, which theme, right? Which theme do I feel most compelled to write about? And